Welcome again. I'm happy to be with you and to share the story of Joseph this week. You all know Joseph in his Technicolor Dreamcoat. I wonder if you pictured it in your mind like I did. I thought it sort of had stripes and it was all different colors, and I found out that really isn't what it looked like. But I think I'll always carry that in my mind since I was a little child. So, before I get into Joseph, though, I just want to, and you can see it up on the screen, you often hear of the 12 tribes of Israel. And the 12 tribes of Israel are actually the 12 sons of Jacob. Now, Jacob, we didn't really get into this in his story, but Jacob had two wives, which we did get into, Leah and Rachel, and each of them had a handmaiden who at some time during their marriage, they gave over to Jacob so that she could have sexual relations with them. What they wanted was more children. And this is whose mother they were. Jacob was their father, but the sons of Leah were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, who was the love of Jacob's life, were Joseph and Benjamin. And actually Benjamin, when Benjamin was born, Rachel died. She died in childbirth. But he was the youngest of the 12 sons. The sons of Rachel's servant, Bilhah, were Dan and Naphtali. And the sons of Leah's servant, Zilpah, were Gad and Asher. So you have 12 sons, and actually Leah also had a daughter whose name was Dinah. But there's just one story that's told about her in Genesis. When the brothers saw, because they could tell, and let me say this about the 12 sons and the whole situation where you have two wives, two handmaidens. Think about it. Think about the jealousy and competition that always probably, at least a little bit, come between sisters. And remember that Jacob really loved Rachel, and he really was not too fond of Leah. And so they felt that, Leah especially. Now, when a mother doesn't like her sister or her sister's handmaiden, what happens is there's always conflict there. And the conflict passes down to the children. And so as Joseph was growing up, his father showed him a lot of favoritism. There's one commentator who said Joseph was just a spoiled brat, actually, until he actually went to prison at one point. And it's interesting, the brothers got so jealous of Joseph, and it wasn't just because of his coat. And we all think of it as a Technicolor coat, but it really, all it says in the scriptures is it was a coat that Jacob had put ornaments on. So we don't know exactly what it looked like. But when the brothers saw that the father loved him the most, they were always plotting against them. And he worked in the fields with Bilhah and Zilpah. He was 17 years old. And they plotted and said, let's get rid of him. Now remember, this was not what we would call civilized society either. So they got together and they were thinking about it. And then Joseph had a dream. Actually, he had a dream, and he told them about it. He had two dreams. And the first one, it says in Scripture, Joseph had a dream, When he told it to his brothers, they hated him. He said to them, "Listen to this dream. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down." His brother said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him for it. They hated him all the more because of his dream and what it said. Then a few days later, he has another dream, and it's about 11 stars. And in the second dream, there was a sun, who was him, the shining sun. And in that dream, the 11 stars bowed to the sun. So Jacob goes out and he boasts again to his brothers and to his father. And so his father does try to calm him down. He says, "Do you think you're going to rule over me and your mother?" And some of you who might have been a little bold, let's say, when you were younger, one of your parents might have said that to you. Maybe not those exact words, but I think you kind of know what his tone was at that point. So they say Jacob had a big mouth. He was spoiled and naive. He's very different than the Jacob that we meet later on in Egypt. So the brothers plan to kill him, but Reuben doesn't want them to do it. So he wants to divert them from that. But he can't. And so what they do is they strip him and they throw him down in a well. But as they're thinking about what they're doing and what's going to happen, along come some traders who are on their way to Egypt. And so Reuben says, "Hey, we could sell him to these guys, and he wouldn't be dead, and we'd be in some money. So why not?" So they sold him to the traders, who took him to Egypt, and who sold him then to a servant of Pharaoh. Now, meanwhile, the brothers are trying to figure out, what are they going to tell the father? They can't tell him that they sold him. So what they tell him is that he was attacked by a wild animal, and they take his coat, his ornamented coat, his Technicolor coat, and they wash it in goat's blood. And they bring it to the father, and they show him, and they say he's been killed, he died. And the father goes into heavy grief, obviously, his favorite son. And lasts for a long time. But nobody knows what happens to Joseph then. So what happens to Joseph is he does go to Egypt, and as I said, he is sold to one of Pharaoh's very important people. And that person's name was Potiphar. And Potiphar really liked Jacob. First, he had him do some of the things in his house, a little housekeeping here, a little brush up. But then finally, when he saw how many talents he had, he put him in charge of all the management of the house. Jacob was a very attractive man. And so Potiphar's wife really wanted him. And so she tried to seduce him. And one day, everybody was out, and she called him in. He had a coat on. He's a coat man. And she tried to get him to sleep with her. And he said, "Absolutely not." And she told him, "Well, if you don't, I'm going to get you in trouble." And so he said, "I don't care." And he ran out, and she had his coat in her hand. And then she started to scream and yell at the servants to say, "Come, come, he tried to rape me. See, here's his coat." And he ran away, but he was going to rape me. And so, of course, they told her husband, Potiphar, and as any good husband would, he was angry. And in his station in life, he could put him in jail, and he did put him in jail. And so Joseph ends up in jail. And there he's so successful that that warden of the jail puts him in charge of all the prisoners because he knows how to organize. People like him. He probably develops a lot of skills, a lot of discernment at this point. He's not the young 17-year-old anymore. And so he is just getting along pretty good. 2 years go along, and there is he has visitors. 2 visitors come that the Pharaoh sends for a little while. They weren't there for too long. They were the baker and the bread maker from the Pharaoh's kitchen. And so each of them has a dream. And they are talking in the jail about, I wish I knew what this dream meant. I wish I knew what this dream meant. And so the baker hears Joseph say, well, I know how to interpret dreams. I can interpret dreams. And so he interprets his dream and he says, oh, you are going to go back to Pharaoh and you're going to be very successful. You're going to go back to his kitchen and you're going to bake wonderful bread and it's going to be marvelous. The baker, they call him the cupcake maker. The cupcake maker, he thinks, well, if he gave him such a good interpretation, he'll give me one too. So he says, well, I'm sorry. Your dream basically means you're going to die. You're going to be punished. A little while after that, the Pharaoh decides he wants these 2 back. And so he brings them back. And the bread maker has already told Jacob, I owe you, basically is what he said. I owe you. And so Jacob said, don't forget me. Don't forget me. So it goes on. There's about 2 more years, nothing happens. Jacob's still in jail. And then Pharaoh has a dream. And his dream is that there are cups. He has 2 different symbols, cups and wheat, sheaves. And that in both instances, they grow, they're rich, the cups are full. And then all of a sudden, these other cups come and the cups are empty, they're emptied out. And in the other dream, the sheaves grow up, they're very healthy, and then these other sheaves come up and they sort of kill them and they go down, they die. And so the Pharaoh says, well, I wonder how I can get somebody to interpret what this means. And so sure enough, the bread maker said, oh, when I was in jail, I knew a guy who could interpret dreams. And I think he's still there. And so the Pharaoh sent for Jacob. And Jacob came and he told him, you know what? This is what it means. Because he had 7 sheaves and 7 cups. He said, you're going to have 7 years of really, really a good crop. And then the next 7 years, you're going to have famine. And what you need to do right now is to take your good crops and conserve 1/5 of them at least, so that when the famine comes, you will be able to feed the people. And so the Pharaoh took his advice, and the good times came, and then the famine comes. And the famine, I'm going to read you a little bit from Genesis chapter 42. When Jacob learned that the grain rations were available in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you keep gaping at one another? I hear, he went on, that rations of grain are available in Egypt. Go down there and buy some, so that we will stay alive rather than die of hunger. So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy an emergency supply of grain. It was only Joseph's full brother, Benjamin, same mother, same father, that Jacob did not send with the rest. for he thought some disaster might befall him. Thus, since there was famine in the land of Canaan also, the sons of Israel were among those who came to procure rations. Now what happens is they have to get it. The Pharaoh he's taken Joseph out of jail. He's made him in charge of this whole thing. And so his 10 brothers have to appear before him, and they do. And actually he recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. And so they beg for grain. And he asks them questions, like he asked them about their father. Is their father still alive? How come there's only 10 of you? Isn't there another son? They say, oh yes, Benjamin, but we had to leave him home. Father didn't want him to come. But could we get some grain? So Joseph said, well, I'll give you a little, but what I want you to do is I'm going to keep your one brother here in jail, and I'm going to send you back, but you have to bring Benjamin back here. And when you bring Benjamin back, then I will give you the rest. And so when they went back, the 9 who went back, they had a hard time convincing Isaac that they should do this. But finally, Isaac said, okay, but you got to take him gifts. And the other thing that Joseph had done was he had put silver, a pack of silver in each one of their bags. And so the father, Isaac, said, no, you have got to return that. So they fixed bags, they put in goodies that they wouldn't have in Egypt, in silver, and they went back to Egypt with all of that. And so when they come back to Egypt, they all come back. And finally, he tells them who he is. He says, I am Joseph. And they are astounded. They're astounded. But because they are his brothers, and he tells Pharaoh this, Pharaoh says, well, let them stay here. We'll give them land. They can use the land. Your father can come here. Your whole family can come here, and I will take very good care of them. And that's how the Jewish people ended up in in Egypt. Remember the Exodus, which we'll get into next week with Moses. But, what happened was they got there because of the famine, and because actually Joseph was the one who conserved people, conserved the grain and everything so people would be able to eat. So they were living very well in Egypt, with Joseph taking care of them, and even Jacob was very happy there. Now, the other thing that's kind of interesting is what Joseph says to them. Because, it's interesting that when they realized who it was, how do you think they felt? I mean, I bet they were scared. They wondered, my gosh, he's pretty far up in the government. Is he just going to have us killed, beheaded, what? But Joseph said to them, do not be afraid. For am I in God's place? ? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. Just think about that. He is saying the fact that you sold me as a slave, the fact that I was in prison all this time, it was bad, but God did it so that we have this present result. You are all living on the fat of the land. We're all together, and a lot of people were able to live because of the grain. And so he comforted them and he spoke very kindly to them. Another sort of the last part of, well, actually the last part of that chapter is that Isaac dies. And the Egyptians, who never liked Jewish people, had come to love Joseph so much. I'm sorry, Jacob died. I keep getting those people mixed up. Jacob died, and the people had loved Isaac so much that they embalmed him. And embalming at that point took 40 days. They embalmed him. They did all of the Egyptian rituals with him. And he had asked Joseph to be sure that he would be buried next to his wife back in Israel. And so Pharaoh said to him, after they had done all the Egyptian rites and rituals, he said, okay, now take your father back to where he wants to be buried. And it wasn't just Joseph and his family who took him back, but the Egyptians went with them because they had such high esteem for Joseph and for his father. So that gives you a lot to think about, doesn't it? So Joseph's story gives us some things to think about. I think one of the most important things, the lesson he sort of learned was that when bad things happen, there might be a reason for it. And so I was thinking a good reflection might be, as you look back on your life, or even today, while you're here at Villa during COVID, what struggles in your life have caused positive effects? You know how he said at the end there, the thing about, yes, you did all these things, he said to his brothers, but look what really happened. You know, now you're here, everybody's alive, it's a good thing. So that's the first question. The second one is, who are the people you've found very hard to forgive? Are there people who you want to forgive yourself? Are there some people that you need to say, I forgive you? And then lastly, when you think about your life, what are some of the times where you felt really treated unfairly? Was it in your family of origin, you know, like with your sister or your brother? Was it in your marriage? Was it here at Villa? You know, when did you feel treated unfairly? And then what did you do about it when you felt treated unfairly? What was your response to that? So I hope that gives you food for thought. And I'll be back next week with Moses. So talk to you then.